Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'm Rashida Hilliard, Chair of the Housing Committee. I'm supported by my co-captain on Zoom, Lee Chung, and my illustrious members of the committee. Thank you all for being here. As a community board, we loosely follow Robert's Rules of Order. We will be following the agenda that was previously distributed, and there are also copies if you need one. If we open a topic to general discussion, we ask that if you would like to speak, that you raise your hand and I will call on you. Our goal is to have a good, robust discussion of our agenda items. However, if we have many people who would like to speak on any individual topic, you may only get to speak once, so please make it count. And that doesn't mean you can't speak again, but generally if there are a lot of topics, I'm just putting it out there. If you are not speaking, we ask that you keep yourself muted if you're on Zoom so that the background noise doesn't interrupt anyone. And if you are also on Zoom and you would like to raise your hand, you can select the reactions at the bottom of your screen. If you're on the phone and you would like to speak, you can press *6 to mute and unmute, and to raise your hand, *9, and I'm assuming *9 to also put it back down. So those are the rules, so to speak. And now we will continue with the actual meeting. So I'm looking around because I like to look at people when I'm speaking, so greetings. So first off, I would like to do the roll call. Rashida, I'm here. Sebastian Chidolapoli. Lee Chung.
Present.
Ingrid De Leon. Jessica Sosa. Here. And Julie Reyes could not make it, but she sends her regards. So everyone is here on the committee. We have a quorum. We can put some emojis up. Congratulations for that. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the approval of our committee minutes from September 23rd. So can I have a second? Second, third, fourth. Thank you. So we have approved our minutes from September 23rd. So thank you for that. So now our next item, which is the main topic of discussion, is New York City. The main topic of discussion.
Let me just mute.
Excuse me, I'll do that again. Our main topic of discussion is on tenants' rights and responsibilities, and we have our guest speakers from the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. We have Chris Servideo. I see, thank you. I see some raise, like shaking your head. Robel, is it Teclea? All right, thank you. That's a thumbs up. And we have Michael Zajakowski.
Perfect, yeah.
Thank you, 3 for 3. So what's going to happen is that we'll have you all speak for 30 minutes or so. Or however much time you need, but as long as it's not all night.
Yeah, totally.
Okay. And then we will open up to a excuse us for a second.
No worries.
Okay. Is that okay, audience?
Can you hear us?
Yes. Oh, okay. Okay.
There we go.
Thank you all. Well, we're all clear now, so thank you. So so we'll open up the discussion to Q&A after we hear from our guest speakers. So without further ado, we can toss up and see who wants to go first, or you can just have a
Yeah, so we do have a presentation. So if it's possible for us to share our screen, and then we can walk you guys through our presentation today.
Chris, would you like to share the screen?
Actually, I think Rebel, can you share it?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll give Robel sharing access.
Thank you. And while we wait on that, I just wanted to thank you all for inviting us today to talk about this really important topic. We will try our best to do relatively quickly. There's a lot of information that we're going to try to cover during the presentation. And just for some context, my team, so there's a sub-selection of my team that's joining the call today. But we do these classes for the public. So we're adapting a tenants' rights class that we use usually for the public for you all. We've removed a couple things just for time, but hopefully it will cover a lot of topics that you guys would like to discuss. So we'll just wait until Rebel pulls that up.
Can you see it?
It's loading.
Okay. A moment.
There we go. If you could put it in presentation mode.
Do you mind putting in full screen or
Yeah.
presenting it?
Okay.
All the way to the left, Rebel, from the beginning.
On Zoom?
Oh, it just disappeared. Go back to slideshow.
Oh, gotcha. There you go.
And then on the far left from the beginning.
Okay, gotcha.
There we go. All right. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So I'm here just to introduce my team. So my name for all of you, my name is Chris Servideo. I am the deputy or the director of the Tenant Engagement and Special Projects Unit. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this is a class that we have developed for the public. So we're going to go through quite a bit today, but we'll hopefully be able to do it in a relatively short amount of time and leave time for a Q&A at the end. One thing I did want to just, to lay the ground before we get started is to say, because we're talking about rights, it's important always to have to engage with a lawyer when you do have questions about your rights. So we always caveat our classes with this. We are not lawyers. We're here to provide you with some basic information about about your rights as a tenant. But we won't be providing any legal advice, especially if there's any very specific questions. But we're happy to take them at the end. And as I mentioned, we're joined today by two of my colleagues, Rebel Tekleb, who is a project manager and typically teaches this class. And then we're also joined by Michael Zajikowski, also a project manager who will assist in the latter half of the presentation. And go to the next slide. So just to throw this out there for you all, since you work with the community, I just wanted to make you aware, this is just one of the many classes that HPD offers. But as you see on this slide, we do offer a lot of other classes for tenants, as well as for owners. On the right side, you'll see some classes that are more relevant for homeowners. And we offer these usually on a monthly basis. It kind of fluctuates depending on who's available to teach these classes, because we partner with other agencies and sometimes other nonprofit partners to support us. But definitely check out our website for future classes that you can let your community know about. And go to the next slide, Rebel. So today we're going to cover quite a bit. So we're going to first start with just an overview of the types of housing in New York City. This is helpful framing. You guys are probably well aware of it, so we'll go through it relatively quickly, but this is helpful framing for tenants who are not as familiar with the different types of housing. And then after that, we'll go through the rights that all New York City tenants have. And it's broken down by these 5 subsections, from housing discrimination, protected classes. We'll talk about housing quality and what to do when you have issues in your home. leases and security deposits. We'll talk about evictions and illegal lockouts. And then lastly, landlord harassment and tenant organizing. And then we'll switch gears a little bit and talk about rent regulated apartments, since those have different types of rights that those tenants have. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about the good cause eviction law that is still trying to figure out, but hopefully we can answer some of the questions that you guys might have. All right, and I think with that, I'm going to pass it over to Rebel to kick us off.
Thank you, Chris. Hope you could hear me well. Your thumbs up if you can hear me well. Okay, great, wonderful. So, you know, as you could see the framing, we have these three categories of, rights for tenants, rights that are extended to all tenants, rights extended to, rent regulated and market rate apartments that used to be covered by, that are not covered by good cause eviction laws. That said, I will be covering only the part that is rights for everybody, if you will, and Michael will be covering the other two categories of rights of tenants. With that said, it is also important to know the profiles of houses and what they mean in this city and state in some cases. So you guys are already probably aware of what is what, but to just be a bit more clearer, when we're talking about rent stabilized and rent controlled apartments, traditionally known as rent regulated apartments, these are governed obviously by the Rent Guidelines Board. The good cause eviction law would be covered by the most recent law, which Michael will delve in detail, but both categories are obviously privately owned properties. And in this section, we have it here to just as a general category, but we would not cover public housing. We will leave to our colleagues at NYCHA to do the description and the work they need. But the last category are obviously the unregulated apartments, otherwise typically known as market rate apartments. But most of them, all the three categories here, other than public housing, are all privately owned. Now, to delve a little bit into the details and more of the rights and what they include, we sort of think of them as Tenants' Bill of Rights, and we'll go one by the subsection that you saw at the agenda earlier. So first, with access and fair and equal access to housing in the city, and that relates to discrimination and the protected classes that are not supposed to be, or at least covered by the laws, the anti-discrimination laws. And you could see here, they're extensive, particularly in New York City. We're familiar in various offices about age, color, and race, national origin, etc., and gender. But here, you have height and weight and status as a victim of domestic violence and presence of children and pregnancy and marital or partnership status. It is just extensive, including a source of income. And so I won't go here line by line on any of them, but just to let you know, that's just New York City provides an extensive sets of protected classes that are covered by anti-discrimination laws in housing. This is obviously in addition to state as well as federal protected classes, which tend to be a bit smaller than this extensive list we have here. But to enforce those laws, New York City's Human Rights Commission is the premier agency that enforces it, and all reporting and all enforcement ought to be directed to our colleagues over there, who are excellent lawyers and other investigative staff that do this work. And so that's our premier agency, New York's Commissioner on Human Rights. Now, the law on human rights and who it applies to, it could sound like, since it's housing, it applies to the landlord who's doing the discriminating, but not quite. It is holistic in some way. It covers landlords, obviously, but managing agents, superintendents, as well as publications, or any advertising platform where the apartments are being listed for rental, as well as banks and lending institutions of the property are all potentially uh, groups that could be held accountable if it is found that a property does indeed discriminate against people of the protected class that you saw in the previous slide. Now, there are in this law, there are some exceptions as to when we talk about protected classes, but it does allow also for certain arrangement or buildings that are preset to be for special use to not be held as discriminatory. And this include like dormitory type residencies that are gender specific, that are in co-ed, if you will. Um, but also they include senior housing and buildings that are built intentionally for folks with disabilities. Um, it also carves out a right for folks who or owners who and landlords who live in the building. For example, like a multifamily or two-family house, where the owner also resides in that building. They do have a little more right about who they allow to come into their building, and sorts of those discrimination categories and protected classes don't have as much coverage in such types of setup. And if a 2-unit house is accepted, a room also would make sense. It's accepted, and it is so. So if somebody is renting a room or their other unit in a 2-family house, they are not covered by the New York City's human rights law for discrimination. So that said, wanted to add a little bit more about pets and folks with disability. The right, we're used to seeing laws against discrimination and reasonable accommodation now in various parts of our lives. It's no different in housing, but for folks with disability here, it goes a little bit further. We thought we share that information about service animals, their particular use, and their distinction, with just regular pets. Service animals are considered, necessary for folks with disability. Therefore, they are part of reasonable accommodation. Hence, they're allowed to be in buildings, and landlords cannot say, I won't rent it to you because you have a service animal, etc. But pets are a different story. Landlords do have the right to not have pets, and violation of that could potentially terminate a tenancy, and invoke eviction and whatnot. At any rate, there are some more details about consent and how many days, etc. But generally, that's something someone should be consulting with their landlords and making sure that pets are indeed allowed in the building. Of course, now if anybody and you will hear us talk more about this in the rest of our presentations, but if anyone is facing discrimination, they ought to call 311 and they will be routed directly to New York City's Commission on Human Rights. But they do also have a hotline. Feel free, by the way, to use the QR code we have over here to pull it out. But any search in Google or other search engines will also quickly bring up New York City's Commission on Human Rights page, and you could do the reporting there as well. So either way, but reaching out to New York City's Commission of Human Rights is the most recommended thing one could do if one is facing discrimination. Now, the other Bill of Rights, if you will, is something on housing quality. We in New York have a right to a habitable home and essential services, and that includes a clean and well-maintained home. We know we're well aware that it is a struggle, but clear of vermin, leaks, mold, and garbage, including in public areas. So we also are entitled to have reliable essential services, including heat during winter, but also hot water. And that would also include having a habitable environment with safety measures such as having smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors in buildings and having adequate lighting in common areas. So, and of course, functioning locks in our doors in our buildings. So these are under the category of housing quality that folks have a right to expect as tenants in New York City. We'll talk a little bit more about in detail about these things in the next slide. Most important, particularly for the season we're in, and for the state, for the geography we live in, is heater. And we have two categories or two requirements, if you will, for heat and hot water, but particularly heat. Hot water is very straightforward. It has to be present. We have to have it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, year long. The only thing to know here is how much the temperature is supposed to be for hot water. And the temperature is supposed to be between 120 degree Fahrenheit and 129 degree Fahrenheit. That range is the minimum and the max. So that is sort of easier to understand. I'm sorry, is mine muting? Okay. The next thing I would like to cover here is heating. It's very important we have a warm place and comfortable space to live in, and enjoy our residence for the amount of rent we pay. A lot of times, it's pretty steep. But there are two different categories in whether it is in daytime and nighttime. The temperature that landlords are required to keep are different. So here, what is considered a daytime temperature is from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And that is dependent on what the temperature is outside. So if the outside temperature is below 55 degrees, apartments must be heated to at least 68 degree Fahrenheit. And of course, if there are any violations in this case, this is HPD's. Our colleagues at code enforcement are the ones that enforce this. And it is reported to us. And of course, you wouldn't be surprised. It comes to us, it gets funneled to us when people call 311. For nighttime temperature, considered between 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. overnight, that is, the heat in the apartments have to be at 62 degree Fahrenheit, regardless of what the outside temperature is. So a little bit cooler than what is required during the daytime, given people are in their bed and in blankets usually, probably, but 62 for overnight and 68 during the daytime. The daytime being dependent on what the temperature is outside. Hope that makes sense. I hope it wasn't too confusing. Now, in terms of the habitability and other habitability to category and safety and health in the homes, obviously pests, mold, and lead-based paint are a hazard. And if there are any issues here, we have to be calling 311. As I mentioned earlier, I said it would repeat 311 probably most of in our conversation here tonight. But that is our hub, if you will, to direct complaints throughout the city. By the way, I mentioned this in housing, but it you would be not surprised that this applies to every city service, if you will. Now, here what I would like to emphasize is gas leaks. Gas leaks are not like everything else that need to be reported to 311. These have to actually be reported to 911. This is an emergency. Gas leaks are very dangerous, very hazardous, could explode anytime and cause even greater damage than the apartment itself. Therefore, they must be reported as an emergency. And here, it's very important to note that people smell rotten egg. First thing they might do is open their doors and their windows so that it goes out of the apartment. But of course, call to find out the source of all that leak. However, still need to call 911. Other considerations here. General fire safety, smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, they're required, landlords are required to provide them for buildings that are more than 3, and generally, encouraged in other smaller size units as well. But here, one thing to note here is the landlord has the responsibility to provide the smoke detectors, but tenants actually have the obligation here on their own and the duty to make sure that those smoke detectors continue to function and continue to be working by changing batteries or periodically doing a check, because landlords are not going to go into the apartments continuously to figure this out. So it's up on the tenants to make sure that what was provided to them are indeed working and functioning for their own safety. So it's up to the tenants to maintain those devices. Now, mostly this entails to changing battery, by the way. If the problem is bigger than that, they have to be, they would be talking to their landlord to fix it or change it. But changing batteries are up to the tenants. Another thing is self-closing doors. This is all to prevent the spread of fires from one apartment to another, from one unit to another. And of course, here worth mentioning are window guards. Now, if there are children under 10 years old, it's mandatory in the city that landlords have to provide window guards. But for houses without children, they still have to provide it, but one must request them. So if you ask for it, landlords must provide them. Now, if anybody needs repairs or want to report a problem in your home building, again, call 311, and 311 will refer those issues to us, to HPD, not our team necessarily. Code enforcement, we have inspectors in code enforcement department that is whose job is entirely that, and most of New York City's population probably know HPD through them because they interact the most than other parts of our agency. So they're out there. I'm sure you've seen them with their uniforms doing regular inspections. So, but that's the route, 311, and then it comes to us. So do please inform constituents if they do have such issues. Particularly, we recommend that when landlords are not responsive to tenant requests. All right, now another Bill of Rights, if you will, is leases. On leases, obviously leases have to be agreed on both by tenants and owners / landlords. Excuse me. and they're subject to at least 30 days renewal notice from the landlord, and landlords are not allowed to charge new applicants for an apartment, more than $20 for application. And that is something that didn't used to be a few years ago. This came about after 2019. And I should add also that for sometimes they would be asking for, extra for credit check. But once, if the tenant has a credit check done and they still have that record, they can also continue to show that as long as it's not more than 30 days old to landlords, and to avoid having to pay for credit check over and over again when they do multiple applications to different buildings, if you will. So there's that. And the other most important thing to talk about, leases, are security deposits. Generally, it's a well-known practice in the city that security deposits are not to exceed 1 month's rent. And they're supposed to cover any damage beyond normal wear and tear at the end of a lease term. And these are supposed to be returnable after vacating the premise if somebody moves out within 14 days for folks in unregulated apartments, and should be used as a final month's rent. Should not be used as final month's rent at the end of a lease term, although that is a very, very common practice in the city. But that's common, although these are, however, these are the rules, if you will. This is the law for it. If anybody has issues with leases, they're very how one addresses them very dependent on what type of apartment one has. Here for unregulated, I know we haven't talked about specifically about other things, and Michael will cover them. But for unregulated tenants, the landlord isn't required to renew a lease, but what they are required to do is notify that they're not going to renew to the tenants based on how long they have lived there. So for any market rate apartment, if you will, if somebody has lived there under a year, they must still give them a 30-day notice saying that we will not be renewing your lease. If somebody has lived in the unit for a year or two, they must give them 60 days. And for anybody who has lived more than 2 years, up to 3 years, they have to give them 90 days or 3 months, if you will. So for each year, increase of 1 month, up to 3 months, but that's the max. So that's one. For rent stabilized and rent controlled, however, people have the right to lease renewal. That's the best thing about it. And of course, they get a very limited rent increase instead of whatever they want, whatever the landlords want in the market rate apartments. And landlord must notify folks 3 to 5 months before the end of the lease to renew. I've said that they have the right to lease renewal regardless, but sometimes the building condition might not be in this or that. They may be demolished. Even rent stabilized apartments change occur. But if they're just going to continue renting it, just not you do have the right to renew, unlike market rate or unregulated apartment. Now, the third category, the good cause covered apartments, I will let Michael discuss them more, but you have the right to lease renewal and can challenge unreasonable rent increase. Now, I'll just say that for now as a sort of a teaser for further discussion by Michael later. And of course, here, if you have any questions about these conditions, as I kept on saying, call 311. But I should add here, we have a team called the Tenant Helpline within the Mayor's Public Engagement Unit, called tenant support team, and they are also very helpful, and you will be forwarded to them. Now there is another category that of folks within the lease that don't generally have a lease, and these are called month-to-month tenants. So these are once a lease expires and they didn't get to renew, these are the folks we call once to month. Their rights are a bit limited, unlike folks who have a year-long lease. So I won't say too much about it, but they are at will. And of course, by at will, it's both the tenants and the landlords can terminate the lease anytime, or they can move out anytime without much of notice here. So just worth mentioning them. If you have issues with security deposit, there are various ways to address them, but particularly this is a New York State issue. But upon signing a lease, a landlord is required actually to keep the security deposit in a saving account that is of interest bearing in New York State Bank. So they're not supposed to, you give it to them, they're not actually supposed to use it for anything. They're supposed to actually have them sit and be saved. So, and of course, at the end of the lease, if one leaves the apartment beyond the normal and tear and wear, they're supposed to give it to you, and anything that there's a damage beyond those normal wear and tear, they could deduct it, but they have to provide an itemized receipt saying what it is that they are charging you for and what is it that they're deducting, to stop them from returning the whole thing, the whole deposit amount, that is. If anybody has a problem with this, we suggest one calls the Attorney General's office, and that is if they're not getting their deposit back within the 14 days, if they're unregulated tenants. If the landlord fails to return the deposit, you could also potentially sue them in small claims court. Now, we realize not everybody lives just by themselves in New York City. Subletting and roommates are a very common practice. I have one myself. But how this works in this situation is generally it's a common practice, and landlords don't stop people from doing so. But what is required is that one does the right thing by asking the landlord or by informing them. Now, if the landlord, and you have to do it officially, if it's official, that is, you have to do it through certified mails a month before you decide to sublet your apartment to somebody. And if they do not respond during that period, it is considered like they actually consent to it. So give them notice. If they don't reply and it passes more than 30 days, yeah, you can assume that they're okay with it. Now, as far as for the rights for the subletter are concerned, landlords cannot increase the rent for that subletter just because he's a subletter or she's a subletter or they're a subletter. But the tenant, the main tenant who is subletting someone else, can charge up to 10% extra if they're providing a furnished unit to the person that they're subletting to. So to 10% extra. Now, subletters or roommates who have signed a lease agreement and have been living in a unit for 30 days or more cannot be evicted unless the primary tenant initiates a roommate holdover case in housing court as well. So they have a little more rights. There's also lease transfer stuff that happens here very commonly. Subletters that want to take over a lease from the main tenant must receive a written consent from the landlord before they could be considered a primary tenant, or the lease could be transferred to them. I said, for any more information, again, suggest people call 311 and ask for the tenant helpline, and they'll provide a back and forth question and explaining it to people. So again, 311 and tenant helpline. Another category, but not least, is eviction and illegal lockouts, which are unfortunately common in the city. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the procedures and what is legitimate and what's not legitimate in such situations. So in New York City, we have protections from illegal lockouts and evictions generally that are not of due process. As a New York City tenant, one has the right to stay in their homes unless the landlord has taken the person to court and have obtained a judgment of possession and warrant of eviction from a judge. Landlords cannot remove belongings from someone's home or cut off utilities or otherwise, generally harass folks into leaving their.
Yeah, never break a promise. I said, next time I see Mr. Boyce, I'll call.
Okay. All right. Mind muting. I don't know who that was. Okay. And they cannot also deny access into entry into someone's home by changing locks and not giving the person, the tenant, that is, a key. Or they cannot just remove the door or otherwise keep somebody from getting into their apartments. Now about the eviction process, since we said they can't just do that, they have to go through an eviction process in court. In New York, there are two main types of evictions. It's really almost like really one, because one of them, the non-payment evictions aren't really evictions. They're like first step before eviction happens, and the initial petition is to enforce or to collect a non-paid amount in the non-payment eviction cases. Once it is verified that a payment is not going to be made, can only then file an eviction case. So it's a two-step process. So just to again, not lawyer here, but I've seen it and going through the process as well. So this is what it looks like. The other category of eviction is the holdover, and these tend to be just generally about lease violation and whatever was spelled out in the lease document that landlords use into evicting people. In both cases, landlords must allow tenants to address issues, and then they must provide a notice of intent to file evictions, and then serve an eviction notice through personal delivery or certified mail. If they don't do that, generally, good lawyers and counsels use the not legitimate serving or not legitimate notice given as a defense, and they're able to help tenants with that. Of course, if one is facing illegal eviction and receiving an eviction notice, especially if there is a lockout situation, just like the gas leak situation, we hear the recourse to take is call 911. This becomes a police issue. Police must actually let the tenant get into the apartment. 311 is not a first help here. They can obviously call it to get more information, but 911 is really the main recourse if somebody's locked out of their apartment. If, however, they feel unsafe, and we know various communities have various issues with police generally, and they feel unsafe or they cannot or the police cannot help, the folks can go to a housing court to sue for an illegal lockout by filing an order to show or cause to restore possession. So that's on lockout, and on illegal evictions, if one receives an eviction notice from a landlord, we suggest that they keep on staying in the apartment, because just because a landlord says I'm giving you a notice does not mean that is an eviction. Landlord can say I'm giving you a month. That doesn't mean that's it. After a month that they have to leave. No one can say one has to leave except a court. So it just becomes a dispute. Obviously, a dispute has started between a landlord and a tenant, but it is not the last word. So, issues of evictions are solved at the housing court level. If one receives papers, one must appear in housing court, obviously, on the date specified. And I will reiterate that, again, only a New York City marshal can evict a tenant after a court order. And here I should do a plugin, if you will, for New York City's Right to Counsel program. Through it, one may be able to get a counsel, in some cases representation. I know it is not extremely well funded, and there's generally lack of lawyers in the city, but some folks with a certain level of income are able to get it, and so folks in lower income status particularly should see if a service can be given to them through the Right to Counsel program, and it is useful if when one can access it, and they're all located at the housing court. Usually, if one goes to the housing courts, they're there. All the legal service providers are there. Now, last but not least for this category, issues of landlord harassment and tenant organizing. Now, in New York State, in New York City, general, people have the right to organize and the right to be protected from harassment. In New York City tenant, one has a right to a peaceful environment from a landlord harassment and organized tenant associations. And if those rights are violated, again, one can call 311 and file a complaint. And of course, one can also always sue a landlord in housing court to obtain repairs. I will just say a little bit more about this on what harassment is. And, we are all used to using harassment in terms of, sexual harassment or racial harassment or gender harassment, those kinds of things. But landlord harassments are, in housing, landlord harassments are not like those. Landlord harassment in housing situation are a landlord simply not doing repair that they're supposed to do, with the intent of making living in that apartment be so unpleasant that you're driven into leaving. That is essentially harassment, what is considered a harassment in the housing context. But I will read out exactly word for word what the definition. Here it says, harassment is any act or omission by or on behalf of an owner that causes or is intended to cause tenant to surrender or waive any rights in relation to the occupancy of their unit. And as I mentioned, not doing repairs or utilities and withdrawal of services, this is a form of harassment. And these things are very common, particularly in apartments that are rent regulated, that are, of course, meaning rent stabilized and rent controlled, because landlords often try to get tenants out so that they could convert the apartments into market rate and then be able to rent them at a higher amount. So that's where we see harassment the most. But there are various tactics, and they will also initiate authorized contact that are repeated, in non-business hours without any permission, and doing visits and so on. But they would also offer buyouts for folks in those particular kinds of apartments, particularly in the unregulated, um, so that, with the main motive being they could fix them up, get the apartments out of regulated status and take them into a market rate and then rent them at higher prices. But they may also do construction work during very unpleasant hours to create disturbances, and to make things very inconvenient, and not having measures to protect against dust when they're doing repairs. Or they will come through leases. They may not offer a renewal of leases, or they may offer payment for just leaving, especially again in those regulated apartments. Now, if anybody is facing harassment, we recommend that they call 311. We have a team called HPD itself has anti-harassment unit that is staffed by lawyers. So, and the folks at Tenant Helpline will also be able to help. So, and of course, tenants can sue by them, on their own as well through other means. And there are free legal assistance may also be available, just like the right to counsel that we talked about. There are programs with a legal aid society and other legal service providers throughout the city that may be able to help with this as well through the AHTP program. To add on into this category about harassment, but also organizing, one way to address problems oftentimes is, to come together and organize in buildings that are particularly sizable. And, we all that well-organized tenant groups are better at having their rights protected with tenant associations, and particularly if they're well-organized and they have good structure. That said, in New York, people have the right to have tenant associations and to be provided meeting space within the building, and for those meetings to not be disrupted or obstructed in any way, and for tenants to not be retaliated just because they participate in tenant associations or any kind of organizing. That said, that concludes my portion of the presentation. Michael will do the rest of the two other categories of tenants and apartments we have in the city. And I think he'll start with the rent regulated part. Michael?
Well, actually, can everyone hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, hear you.
Yeah, great. Amazing. Since Robel already spoke for more than the half hour allotted that we have, we are also happy to go straight to the question and answer portion in the interest of time, for all of you, depending on what you guys are feeling. We can send you the rent stabilization and good cause information, or I'm happy to go through it as quickly as possible. Again, I'm sorry we don't want to be taking up more than the half hour you gave us.
Good evening. First of all, thank you for sharing the slideshow with us and providing so much information. Just in case people in the audience didn't hear, because the first part of the slideshow was roughly 30 minutes, we wanted to open it up to Q&A session. And if you have additional questions that weren't answered, I think we could go to the next slideshow, something like that. So we'll open it up to questions first.
Yes.
Okay, I mean, we can get your email if you want.
Right.
You can share the presentation.
So the question I'll just ask, I think it was mentioned that the presentation would be shared. Am I correct? Or,
Yeah, we can share the deck afterwards. I'll share it with you.
okay. Do you have the, this in other languages, like Spanish or what have you?
We don't at this time. It's just in English.
Okay.
We are developing this slideshow is based off of a tenant bill of rights that we are working on, which is currently being translated into the 12 city languages. So when that's done, it's just like more of like a one-page flyer with all of this info. We can share that with you all as well, and that has that will be translated into the 12 New York City languages.
Okay, thank you for that. So, right, no, I now want to open it up to the committee and anyone who has questions. So committee, does anyone have any questions? No. Yes.
Rashida, I do.
Um,
Rashida? It's Lee. I do.
yes, I
Yeah,
see
we
that
are.
Sebastian was speaking as well, so I wanted to honor whoever was speaking. So I'm gonna pass it to Sebastian and then Lee, and then Mary, Ellen Gibbs, I believe.
I don't know, maybe it was like missing from the presentation, but for the heating, you mentioned that for 6 a, for the morning, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., if there is a violation, HPD will make an inspection, and for the overnight, there is no inspection, and if someone complains about a heating issue overnight, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. So I don't see that violations are issued for that time period.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you quite well. Can you say that again?
So on that slide deck, you have 6 a.m. to 10 p.m.
Mhm.
If the temperature is not maintained at 68, violations are issued and there is an inspection. If there is a complaint, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I do not see that language. Is that a typo, or there are no inspections if someone makes a complaint for overnight?
They unmute. Yes.
Yeah, I mean that it doesn't mean that inspection will not be done at the other period. That wasn't the intention. I apologize for confusion.
Yeah, I
but-
mean, I think that, realistically, we don't have inspectors that are going out at 1 a.m. However, that said, there is opportunity when tenants do submit their complaints via 311. When they're contacted by HPD, they can schedule a time when they would like for the inspector to come if it's in after hours. So if they wanted somebody to come after 10 p.m., there's a possibility, but that's left up to the code enforcement office. But that's a very good point. I mean, nobody's going to be able to do a violation at 3 a.m.
So there are no violations issued for that time? Special.
I'll have to get back to our code enforcement team in terms of exactly how they handle overnight complaints or violations. But yes, let me follow up on that.
Thank you.
Now, Lee?
My question is in regard to, you talked about tenants' rights, but do you also handle shareholders' rights? Those who live in co-ops?
No, I mean this is this covers only tenants in that are renting in co-op situations. They're part owners in some ways. So I think it would be beyond the scope of this presentation. But from the little knowledge I have, that is an issue between their board, which are oftentimes elected by the shareholders themselves and the shareholders. And of course, HPD also is involved in this. It would be a different office, not us and not code inspection, but code enforcement, that is. But we know HPD is there to guide on the good governance of the board. But we do not cover in this course or in this presentation that we have come to do today. Because mainly this is about tenants and tenant rights, not shareholder owner rights.
Thank you.
Okay.
We'll discuss that later. Our next person is
Mary
Mary
Ellen?
Ellen Gibb.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much for having this kind of speaker, because it's very, very important, because we're actually going through this in my building. So my fellow tenants said, they saw this meeting, Mary Ellen, please go on and ask us these questions. We have a really bad problem with our landlord. He has a super that does absolutely nothing for the building, yelling and screaming at the tenants. It's like, it's actually bullying and all that. The building is a hot mess, the garbage and everything. And then when they have like tenants above pounding on floors to people blasting. And then when we write to the landlord, even in writing a million times to do something about it, nothing's being done. It's like really out of control. Till finally he wrote an email back, well, if you don't like it, move. Is that allowed? And then we also pay, the deposit, like you said, which is my second question. Are we supposed to get interest back at the end of every lease? So a tenant harassment with the super and the landlords and not doing anything, and the interest on the deposits.
May I ask what kind of apartment your building is? Is it rent
Rent
regulated?
stabilized, 85 or more apartments,
Okay.
rent stabilized.
Okay. Michael did not get a chance to cover it, but in further presentations, we would have covered issues. I know you talked about various things here. Let's start with sound first, sound violations. Those are often addressed with New York City's Department of Environmental Protection, if you will. It's noise pollution, if you will, in some ways. As well as the police. Issues of intertenant, if you will, intertenant issues are not addressed in this way. The main stuff that we often are concerned about is issues between landlord and a tenant. So no, it is not okay for landlord not to do repairs, as you mentioned. You called it, to use your own words, hot mess and super not being violated. And this is it sounds to me a form of harassment.
It's really bad. He
Yeah.
yells and screams at everybody. He doesn't, I mean, you ask the super, he blows up at you, starts screaming and gets in your face if you're a woman. It's so
Right.
out of control. The landlord will do nothing.
Right.
They'll tell the person on top to start banging and blasting music to the point where you start to shake. You can't even go to work. It's like during the pandemic, all night, all day, pounding. And he says, if you don't like it, move. And he put it in writing, so you can't do that, correct?
No, they can't. And I'm gonna tell you a little bit about two things that we didn't get a chance to talk about for folks that are in rent controlled apartments or rent stabilized apartments, is that you can actually get a rent reduction order issued. You may already know that rent.
DHCR?
That's right. Bravo. That's right. You have to get it. DHCR, particularly the Office of Rent Administration, as you all could hopefully see in the slide, is the one that issues it, and you could apply to them to get it, to get your rent to be reduced in the first place if they're not doing, what they're supposed to do. But there's another thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about is rent overcharge orders, and hopefully that you're not already being overcharged, but that could also be something.
Yeah, we are, because we're paying for an elevator, a replacement of an elevator that's supposed to be new, and it's still the 1953 elevator. with change of buttons. And we've been paying for this thing over 10 years now.
Okay, so I'm not exactly sure how that particular thing works out, but overall, I suggest you consult and you reach out to the HCR to do investigation. And they have an excellent team over there, the Tenant Protection Unit at the state level, that is also staffed by lawyers that look into these kinds of things.
All right.
Thank you very much.
So thank you
Um,
all. And just for the sake of time, because I know we have another meeting, the person who Samsung SM-S90, can you please identify yourself, and you now have the floor, and you will be the last question.
Yes, good evening. I'm Paula Johnson. I'm a tenant of NYCHA. Have been since November 1957, when I was 5.5 months old. There has never repetitiously been any changes of elevators outage. We've been going through the same thing all these years. As a little girl, I remember. Now, this is what I want to know. First of all, you're taking over a development that is deeply embedded in debt, and you're supposed to do these remarkable things to make it a lot more comfortable for us to live. But could you explain something to me? Now we're sitting at a meeting where everybody's all discussing their situations. When NYCHA is going to be aware of, or are they going to come forth to give their tenants a fair chance in knowing exactly what we have to expect? Now, one of the main things I know
if
is that
I don't mean to interrupt, but just for the sake of clarity and for the sake of saving time, I know it can be confusing. HPD, Housing Preservation Development, and NYCHA. Unfortunately, we do not cover NYCHA. NYCHA is its own separate agency. If you have a question for HPD, I would be more than gladly to help and do whatever I can. But we don't know the world of NYCHA, and we do not do NYCHA. I regretfully. If the question is about NYCHA, I just wanted all of us to save time.
so Progressive is not taking over NYCHA.
I don't know, and I don't know anything about NYCHA related stuff. We are HPD, different agency. I know we are both housing agencies, but different agencies with different mandate. They do public housing, the projects, what are known generally colloquially as the projects, but HPD does inspection of non-NYCHA housing in the city.
Well, weren't we invited to participate in developing or redeveloping of NYCHA apartment buildings? Well, I don't understand is that in that case, we're focusing on something that's not in our lane. Now, I know for a fact that city council votes on increases in rents. Am I right or wrong?
Rent guideline board does for rent regulated apartments, but for NYCHA, I don't know, and I
No. I said city council. Don't they vote on regular apartment increases? Okay.
The answer is no.
no.
No,
Oh, they don't vote. Okay.
no.
I just want to know because I know that a lot of city council members own buildings here in New York City. And I'm just wondering with the increases, what fair chance the increases are made of the tenants' developments if the persons that own the buildings are the ones that are voting on the increase.
Well, we can definitely look into having NYCHA be invited to a further, a future meeting. This is just our second meeting of the year of this new cycle. So we will definitely look into inviting NYCHA and any other suggested agencies that would be helpful for what we need to discuss in housing. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. And thank you for those of you who tried your best to answer all questions, or thank you for attending.
Happy
We-
holidays. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Happy holidays. And we have one more question from the audience.
I think you can hear me. Can individuals contact the office about individual issues
Yes.
for help in any such process? The other thing I wanted to say was, co-op questions, there's an ombudsman in the state attorney general's office that can be useful. And the other thing I wanted to say was, this is a great presentation, but it was very thick. It would be useful to not get copies of it, but maybe have like a cover page with the contact names, phone numbers, and your email addresses. I think that would help the community a great deal.
We have that all at the end. As we said, we didn't have time. We had a shorter amount, but as Robel, you can see on the screen here, the end of our presentation has all that info, and we will be sending this out. So hopefully the community board can send it out to all of you. So we do have just the high level contacts here, as Robel was showing. Thank you for bringing that up, Robel.
Well, thank you very much. We're grateful. Thank you and happy holidays.
Yeah.
Do you have any closing words? Any parting words?
You
No,
know,
I mean, this is it. Go ahead, Robel.
yeah, I want to take the opportunity to add a little bit. You know, folks are generally aware of rent regulated apartments, but you know, a lot of folks are not yet aware of the folks that used to be in general market rate. But the good cause eviction law that's only been alive since April has also is protect, you know, it has a potential to protect people. And unfortunately, we didn't get to talk much about it, but I wanted to take the closing time you gave us to just say that tenants, oftentimes, if they're reaching out to you, to just tell them, you know, whether they know if their apartment is generally considered market rate, if it's not stabilized, go through the housing court process, and the reaction ought not to be, you know, to fear and to leave. There are some protections and that have been extended further, and to just take advantage of it. And hopefully we'll work together. And of course, if you have any questions, do please reach out to us. You have our contact information. We'll be happy to further work closely with you and keep folks more in their own apartments and prevent displacement.
Thank you, Robel, and thank you all for inviting us again. I will follow up afterwards with the deck that'll have useful links that you can share out to your communities. But happy to join another one of these if you guys want to go through the rent stabilization section. But we'll obviously share the deck with you so you can take a look at it. But thank you again.
Thank you. Oh, yes, thank you. And we will most likely be inviting you to another meeting in the near future. Part 2 coming soon.
Sounds good. Have a great holiday.
Happy
everyone.
Thanksgiving, everybody.
Right.
We still have a few more items. You can stay on the line if you like, people, you don't have to, but we, our next item is a chair's report. I'll quickly read what I have here. So I was, reading some articles and I came across housing vouchers. So according to an audit by the state comptroller's office, it takes people on average 10 months to find a housing apartment and secure a city voucher through FEPS, which is Family Homelessness and Eviction Prevention. Basically, I just will kind of summarize that. I realized that there are various types of vouchers and how, although you might be able to apply for a voucher, there's some bureaucracy that people go through in securing the voucher. And then it's also difficult sometimes to find housing. So these are topics that I thought maybe we could discuss in the near future. Although I will also mention that one of the spokespersons for the Department of Social Services noted that there was a 42% increase of households placed in housing using the city FEPS, FHEPS voucher system in 2024. And that's up, but I think it was a 42% increase between 2023 and 2024. Although we also saw an increase of homelessness, well, people in the shelters, but it had to do with asylum seekers. So I just wanted to note that, you know, we as a community across New York, we're trying our best, but we see that we have a lot of things to contend with. So that was something that was on my radar. Other than that, old business basically will be the next business. I just wanted to go over that. We did have plans to discuss some other issues dealing with co-op boards and possibly, you know, the rights of shareholders. And that's something in the near future. We discussed this at our first meeting. That's something we would like to look into. And we would also like to look into discussing the local law 97, which has to do with carbon emissions in buildings. So, and how buildings will deal with moving over from oil to gas. So, and gas to electric. Was that oil to gas, gas to electric? Gas to electric. Thank you for that. And other than that, new business? Going once, going twice? Okay. So I would like to adjourn this meeting at 7:16. Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night. Happy Thanksgiving.
Good
Happy
night.
Thanksgiving, Lee.
An amazing meeting.